you all for coming out tonight for the Genius Next Door. And as Hank mentioned, some of you were in the audience when we ran a beta test of the Genius Next Door back in November. And at the end of that session, we had an opportunity to have a dialogue with members of the audience, what went right, how we could improve the program. And one way we thought we'd improve the program is to open up the auditorium to alcohol. So, if you don't know this room says no drink or food permitted. And when I talked to Hank about running the Genius Next Door without alcohol, I said, no, that just won't happen. It won't occur. And particularly with our geniuses up on stage, who said they would only do this if we could have a glass of wine in our hand, too. So, again, I want to thank the Dali Museum for being so malleable on this important occasion. About a year or so ago, Dr. Hine called me up and said, Frank, let's go to lunch. I'd like to take you downtown and to grab a hamburger. To which he ordered for me, and the hamburger came with an egg on top of it. And when I bit into the sandwich, this egg yolk dripped down my elbow. What in the world are we doing? I said. He said, Frank, I want to talk to you about a strategic vision, about putting eggs on burgers, about doing all different things you might have never thought of. Let's live on the edge for a moment. Let's get out of our comfort zone and let's try something new. Let's have an opportunity where a world-class museum and a world-class university collide and see what happens. He pulled out on paper a sketch of Dali 2020 vision, the strategic plan looking forward over the next several years. And as part of that, and all the way through that, there was an educational component. And in there, I saw that they wanted to merge much more closely with the university. And so through several dialogues with the faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Business, the College of Education, and the library, we were able to come up with a memorandum of understanding, which was signed by our regional chancellor and the director, the head of your board, the chair of the board here at the Dali Museum. And with that launched a spectacular friendship. And with that has launched a new class on innovation for our students. And with that has launched the Genius Next Door. That's how we got here. So we are at the infancy stage of this creative merger between our two institutions. And we hope that many more opportunities and ideas can emerge going forward. So as you think about a university and a museum like the Dali, and if you have ideas, please drop those ideas. Drop us a note. See what we can do together. We all love this city. We love this town. And what can the university do in collaboration with the Dali? So again, thank you, Hank, and the entire Dali for everything that you've done to support us. So with that, let's get right into the Genius Next Door. Here's how we're going to run this evening. You saw the flyer. It probably said from 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock. That is true. And we'll probably go until around 10 till 7. And then we're going to have a breakout session. We're going to have some dialogue here, some fireside chat with some of our geniuses. And then after that, we're going to ask the audience to ask a question or two. And then we're going to break. And we're going to go next door to give individuals an opportunity to walk up to the Gala Cafe to grab another drink and to go and have a more intimate conversation with our geniuses. And so there'll be 3 tables set up next door in the Raymond James room. And so based on the conversations that we begin here on stage, and you have ideas and burning questions, and you'd like to learn more about what it is that our geniuses are doing, we're going to take it right next door and keep the dialogue alive. They kick us out at 8 p.m., I understand. So we must be out of the Dali by 8 o'clock tonight. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And I'd like to start at the very far end here and introduce our first genius next door, Dean Carol Hixon. Welcome. Welcome to the stage. Thank you very much. Carol. Yep. Oh, we're not talking yet. No. In a minute. So Carol Hixon is the Dean of the Poynter Memorial Library at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Dean Hixon has been a professional librarian since 1984. In the past 35 years, she has worked in some of the best academic libraries in North America, including Cornell University, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the University of Florida, Indiana University, UCLA, and the University of Oregon. Prior to joining the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, Dean Hixon was the Dean of the Libraries at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada. Since her arrival at the university, Dean Hixon has been focused on strengthening the Poynter Library's connection with the students and the broader community, and making the library the intellectual centerpiece of the campus, and guiding the university conversations into the rapidly changing world of electronic resources, electronic media, as well as the world of the online and distance learning courses and new programs. Welcome aboard. Next to Dean Hixon, we have Dr. Jill McCrakin. Dr. McCrakin is an educator and an activist. She is an assistant professor of English and professional writing at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, and I understand that she's also in the midst of her tenure and promotion decision this year. Good luck. It is, no worries there, no worries. No worries. So, in addition to her ongoing research on the topics of public policy and gender studies and reproductive technologies, she is perhaps best recognized for her research into the rhetoric of marginalized communities, with a special focus on the rhetoric of sex workers and sex trafficking. She has just completed her widely anticipated solo-authored book, Street Sex Workers Discourse, published by Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Press. This book explores the power of everyday language and how the rhetoric we apply towards street and sex workers influences the material conditions and opportunities of this marginalized population. Welcome. Finally, we have Daniel Scott. Daniel Scott is a full-time instructor of entrepreneurship and serves as the Associate Director of the Sustainable Entrepreneurship and Innovation Alliance at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. The Alliance is a community of entrepreneurs, organizations, students, and faculty committed to fostering visionary entrepreneurs dedicated to making an impact on their communities. Daniel is also involved in the Young Venture Capital Society, the Florida Venture Forum, and the University of South Florida College of Business Alumni Association. Welcome aboard. So how we're going to do this tonight, I have prepared 3 questions that I would like for each of the geniuses to address. In order of the questioning, the first question is going to talk about the individuals themselves. We'd like to get to know a little bit about each of you, a little bit about your background, and what drove you into the career that you currently have. Then we're going to talk about the field that you are studying or working, and talk about some of the recent past. And then the last question will take us into the future and look at some of the innovative things and why we should care about that as an audience. So Dean Hixon, first question. First of all, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, and how you first became interested and passionate about the world in which you currently work? And as part of this, we would be interested in hearing a little bit about the magical, that aha moment that happened in your life where you said, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
All right. Well, I grew up, I spent the first 18 years of my life in Pennsylvania, and I certainly never aspired to be a librarian. And if any of you have seen the recent Halls commercial where there is a person in a library coughing and this very obnoxious person comes up and loudly shushes the person, if that is the stereotypical image of a librarian, who in their right mind would want to be that? So I certainly never aspired to be a librarian. So the first, what my passion was in junior high, high school, and college was studying foreign languages and cultures and learning about the world around me through those languages and those cultures. So when I went off to college, which was Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa, I continued my study of languages. I studied Spanish, French, German, and Russian. And my first foray into the world of libraries was one of my jobs as a student, paying my way through school, was I got a job in my junior year working in my college library. I was hired in that position because I was studying Russian and they needed someone who could type catalog cards with a Cyrillic typewriter. And then frequently erase what she had typed because she did it wrong. So I learned a lot about the electric eraser in my first few months working in a library. And after I graduated from college, I moved to Ithaca, New York, and I got a job at the Cornell University Libraries. At this point, I was a paraprofessional, and I was hired in the libraries there again because of my language experience. So I worked in their world-class Southeast Asian collection and in their Latin American collections. And I was hired because I knew Spanish, I knew French, I knew German, and those were languages that they needed to work with those collections. So I worked there for 4 years, and then I moved back to my home state, Pennsylvania, and I worked at the Bryn Mawr College libraries for 3 years. Again, I was hired because of my languages. And while I was at Cornell, I also took Portuguese, and at Bryn Mawr, I took Italian. So I've studied 6 foreign languages and the literatures and the cultures of those languages. And while I was working at Bryn Mawr, I was encouraged by people to apply for the program, the master's program in information studies at Drexel University in Philadelphia. So I did that, and I was very fortunate to get an NEA fellowship, paid full tuition and a stipend, and I pursued that program. But I went into it not because I had a passion for librarianship or information studies, but because I thought this will be my way to get paid more for what I'm already doing. And it was in graduate school that I discovered my passion for my career, my profession. Because it was in graduate school that I learned about the profession and the principles that underlie it. And it was in graduate school that I learned that librarians are committed to open and free access to information for everyone, that they're committed to presenting multiple points of view and protecting people in being able to investigate and discover and discuss those multiple points of view. And so that was where I discovered my passion for the field, which has just grown as I've worked around the country and in Canada.
Thank you very much. Dr. McCrakin, same question. What was that aha moment? Tell us a little bit about it.
I think for me, I've always been interested in marginalized people. I've always been interested in people that have less power. Even as a child, I was just thinking about my upbringing, which was relatively middle class, but my parents were always doing foster care, so I grew up with a lot of different foster kids. One day I counted, I think there were like 36 kids came through my house as we were growing up, right? So it was a lot of different kids. But I'm always interested in power relationships and how systems of power get created and how they influence and affect individual people. And when I went back to grad school, I graduated and I worked for a while. I was actually in accounting, and I did managerial accounting for a very long time, and I liked it. It was fun. But I knew that something was missing, and I started doing some research on what's out there, and I didn't even know what rhetoric was. I had no idea. And a professor at the time, Bonnie Sunstein, said to me, you know, I think you really want to do rhetoric, because I was saying, I'm interested in language, I'm interested in philosophy, I'm interested in discovery, I'm interested in writing. And she was like, in teaching, and she said, that's rhetoric. I was like, oh, okay, great. So that was it. I went to rhetoric, and but I knew immediately from joining grad school, when I joined grad school, that I wanted to go into the rhetoric of the everydayness. That's not what it was necessarily called at that time, quotidian rhetoric, which is now what I spend a lot of time on. But I wanted to look at the rhetoric of gender, the rhetoric of sexuality, the rhetoric, Tiffany, my colleague, and I today were talking about the rhetoric of our clothes. Basically, rhetoric, Aristotle defined it as the available means of persuasion in a given situation. I define it as, a little nervous to be redefining over Aristotle, but I define it as how language shapes our world, and how I persuade you to view me in a certain way by what I'm wearing and how I present myself. And that's rhetoric to me. It's very persuasive. And there's all kinds of rhetoric everywhere, so it's fascinating to me. And I started looking at marginalized people, and I started looking at these categories that are very interesting to me: gender, sexuality, race. And so it started moving in that direction. And I've had a lot of people ask me, you know, where is your connection to sex work? What is that, right? And some people have said it's a veiled question, are you a sex worker? Which is very interesting as well. And my dissertation chair said, well, Jill, you should just ask them, why are you propositioning me, right? So I don't typically answer that question, but my interest in sex work is people that are involved in sex work the body, technologies in many ways, sexuality, gender, and power. Power is really, really present there, and that's really important to me. So I like to kind of pull these things apart and say, how are power relationships formed, and how do systems both empower and disempower people, and most importantly, how can individual people push back and co-create and co-construct these systems of power? So that's really what I am exploring and have been exploring for years since I started.
Thank you very much.
Same question?
Same question.
All right, so I think it's
background question.
how did I get here and why?
Exactly.
So I think it was Mark Twain that said that the two most important days in your life are the day that you're born and the day you find out why. And so I guess the who, what, when, and where. My full name is Daniel James Scott. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, Friday, July 14th, 1978, under a beautiful waxing gibbous moon to Richard and Janice Scott. And the why, I don't think there was a moment, but I think there was a process. So I've loved watching entrepreneurs work for a great number of years. And there's one specific kind of dichotomy that I enjoy when I watch them work. It's the idea that there are idea people and the idea that there are execution people, and normally they're not the same person. And so entrepreneurs can typically take a really great idea and really fantastic execution and marry the two under one roof, which is great. So I've been kind of developing both of those skills myself since I was a kid. In terms of generating ideas, I was the first generation to be able to have a computer in the home when I was a kid. It didn't necessarily have internet. I got that for the first time at college. But I remember signing on and thinking, wow, there's like great information floating around this internet thing. I gotta go learn how to share my information on the internet. And so I did. I learned HTML, and so well, that's great, but it doesn't look all that fantastic. I wouldn't want to read this. It looks like an awful book. And so I taught myself graphic design and said, okay, well now I got pages that have great text and great images, but I don't really have. It's not helping anybody, right? They can't interact with it. So I took to learning PHP and MySQL and started putting together databases and interacting with those databases. And it was almost, if you can imagine, like a rudimentary like Excel spreadsheet on the internet. And at the time I was working at a consulting practice in Tampa, and I was like, wow, this is maybe I could do something with this. I can marry technology with being able to help in mass business owners. And so I was able to put together a little interactive database. I threw it out there. A couple of weeks later, Entrepreneur Magazine calls me and says, hey, listen, we found your thing. What is it and how can it help entrepreneurs on a large scale? And I thought, how cool is this? From a total ego perspective, this is one of the coolest things ever. And I started really honing in on how can I marry different elements of things I come into contact with in one vision. So that's kind of how I started developing my talents there. On the execution side, I always kind of considered execution was an element of curiosity, and my curiosity kind of happens in three phases. It's how did they do that? How could I do that? And then how could I break that? And so music was really what got me into it. Picture me at 7 years old getting into my father's records. Of course, I find the one that's probably the one I shouldn't listen to is the Beatles' White Album. And I had taken piano lessons, but I really wasn't all that great at that point. But I got to the part in the album where it kind of just dies down and Ringo starts playing drums, kind of a weird beat, and then you just hear one chord being pounded over that drum beat, and then I think it's McCartney, correct me if I'm wrong, just screams over the top, why don't we do it in the road? And I'm like, well, I can play that piano part. That's great. And I didn't know it at the time, but I knew the way he said that, it was something that was supposed to instill some form of instigation and to get the audience to feel a very particular something. So I learned that song. Every band I was in after, I would always force that song because I knew I could draw a reaction, which was great. And so I figured out that's how they did that. And then I started writing things so I could figure out how I could do it. And it was 1988, the movie Buster had come out. And yeah, I probably shouldn't admit this, but my parents did let me watch it. But you know, that soundtrack was done by Phil Collins. He had done this Mindbenders cover, which was and it was great. I hear it. I think it was during the credits, the groovy kind of love, and it's playing over. I'm like, that song sounds awfully familiar. And at the time, I was practicing a song to play at a recital. It was Clementi's Sonatina in G major, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And it was before, you know, rap music was playing an 80s song and then talking over the top. This guy was singing a whole totally different song over classical music, and he broke it. And I thought, wow, this is something really kind of creative. So I spent a number of years just writing as many songs as I could, trying to break the traditional chord structures. The A B C B structure kind of bored me. So I wonder how I could kind of break this. And so I really honed that through music, and I still kind of use that to this day if I'm interacting with people or anything else. So that's kind of why I see this as kind of fantastic. And I like being at the precipice of having a really great idea and being able to execute on it and working with teams that are able to do that. I've been fortunate enough to start a number of different companies and programs, including the entrepreneurship program here at USF St. Pete. So that's a really long answer to a short question.
Could you repeat your date of birth?
Friday, July 14th, 1978.
Amazing. It's amazing. Would you like to take a second question since you have the microphone?
Carol's eyes are saying yes.
Okay. So let's take your field of entrepreneurship a moment.
Yeah.
And take us back in time a little bit.
Sure.
And some of the moments where this has actually become a field of study.
Sure.
Because my guess is when many of us were in college, there was never a program in entrepreneurship per se. So how did we get here, and what were some of the driving forces behind such a program in entrepreneurship?
There were some. I had an opportunity to go out to San Francisco this past week and talk to a number of entrepreneurs that are nearing, unfortunately, the end of their lives. Kind of talk about how entrepreneurship really became a field in colleges. It was this fantastic group of people that were entrepreneurs themselves that basically said, I'm going to come to these institutions and I'm going to foot the bill. There's this great woman I got to meet. She helped start USASB, this United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Couldn't afford to run this. There may be a couple of people teaching an entrepreneurship class here and there inside of these institutions. So I'm just going to foot the bill. I'm a consultant. She reminded me several times that she was the only female as part of this group, which I thought was just tremendous. And they pushed, they forged ahead. It's still relatively new. I'm not going to lie to anybody and say, well, wow, this is something we could steal from the best programs in the country and bring here. When Dr. Bill Jackson, who's the director of our program, started this program, it was only the second major at a state institution here in Florida, and it still is 3 years into it. The difference, I think, now, when I did my MBA at USF Tampa, which I completed in 2002, there were some entrepreneurship classes, but you would spend most of your time trying to learn about where would I find data. You know, there wasn't, an internet research class. I couldn't just necessarily call the librarian and say, where could I find this data or where could I find customers? Some of that stuff's gone away. And so the students have data availability. They have access to social media. They know where to go find at least early customers. They can do a Kickstarter project and not only talk to customers, but get cash out of customers up front. What a great concept. So what that's allowed us to do from a very unique perspective now is really set a process that allows entrepreneurs to validate their ideas and their execution really early on. And there's been some great leaders in this field. Steve Blank out at Stanford's been kind of a model of this idea of lean entrepreneurship, lean startup. Can we walk an entrepreneur through a teachable process and get them to be successful, and more importantly, let them know when they're being successful, which is really fantastic. So we adopted that here relatively early. We adopted, you'd be proud if you came and visited us just right across the street at USF St. Pete. We're innovating all the time. Can we teach a class on to an undergraduate student about how to build a company? Yes, we have an actual class in scalability. We're at the forefront of being able to do that. Again, out in San Francisco, we got to teach some classes working with other academics of some of the processes and procedures that we're using and being able to share with them some of the things that we've learned during these first 3 years, kind of sitting out there on the cutting edge. And it's been super exciting. So I guess there's a mixture of people out there at the forefront getting entrepreneurship education into the schools. Then there's another group at the forefront of teaching how do you teach doing a startup, this weird entrepreneurship thing. And then there's a whole other group. Nathan's back there as well. Hi, Nathan, part of our team, and myself and Dr. Jackson really at the forefront of can we bring creative problem solving into the mix? Can we bring scalability into the mix and really try to advance the field right here in St. Petersburg? So did I answer your question? You absolutely did.
Okay. Thank you. Jill, I think sex work's been around a little bit longer than entrepreneurship.
It is the same thing.
It's the same thing. That's right.
Same. Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I have to say, in order to talk about some of the changes, one of the reasons that I actually got into this field, which I forgot to mention earlier, was this concept of helping people, right? Which I think often comes about when we think about people who live on the margins or are marginalized or who have less power or whatever it is. So this concept of helping. But what's fascinating to me and what I'm actually a little bit nervous to admit that. Because in the field of sex work where I work in sex worker rights, there's a lot of sex workers who are like, we don't need your help. Who are you, this whatever you are, to tell us that you're going to help us, right? And one of the big shifts, there are a lot of people that may not have as many resources and may not have as much power. I don't know if they would define that as needing help. And I've actually written about this concept of the help exchange and what the helper gets and what the helpee gets in this connection, which is fascinating to me. But one of the big changes that's happened in the last 20 years with sex worker research in particular, but I would also talk about this in terms of my writing world when I teach writing and communication and discovery, is going out into the field and listening to the people. So initially when I wrote my book, it was called Listening to the Language of Sex Workers. So it was about because typically what's happened is people will research on sex workers, about sex workers. But it's not sex workers' voices who are necessarily being brought up to the forefront. And surely the sex workers are not doing the research. That would just be crazy, right? And what's happening is that's exactly what's happening. Sex workers are doing the research. Sex workers are academics who are doing the research. And there's participatory action research where academics go out and talk to the sex workers. And they're not just identified as sex workers. They're all kinds of things, people, whatever. But they may be involved in street economies or the internet or whatever it may be. And we're saying, what's going on for you? What are your needs? What are your interests? What do you want to know about? This is the academy. I have my questions. But what's important to you, right? And I'm learning from them. So I'm not helping them, they're helping me. And that's a huge shift for me. And it's a huge shift in the literature that this has been taking place in the last 20 to 30 years. And so I was very, very privileged to be a part of this process that just happened in the last year and a half. The United Nations Universal Periodic Review occurs, and Paraguay, of all places, gives the United States a recommendation. The United States gets, I don't know, hundreds, I don't know if it's thousands, but they get a lot of recommendations. They give us this recommendation, and they say, you know what, you're LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people have a lot of social justice issues. And by the way, you're sex workers, which they use the word prostitutes, which I can talk about at some other time, they also have a lot of issues. These people are marginalized, and they're not safe, and you're not doing a good job of taking care of them. So you need to accept this recommendation into human rights and say, what are you going to do about it? So when they got that recommendation, when we, the United States, got that recommendation, sex worker rights organizations were all over that. And they got together, and I was privileged to be a part of this, but this was sex worker-led, right? And they got together, we got together, and we met with the State Department people, and we went and said, look, this is what you need to do to accept this recommendation, and we're going to help you. We're going to make it real easy, because we know you want to look good, right? You need to accept this recommendation, and you also need to be able to be successful, because they're not going to accept a recommendation that they can't be successful, because we're going to be checking in. But it was all important to the sex worker rights community and sex workers that they accept that recommendation, and they did. And in March of 2011, March 18th, they accepted Recommendation 86, which was a huge victory for the sex worker rights movement. And in response to that, Hillary Clinton came out in April and talked about it and actually used the word sex worker. And that is very new, because prostitute, and there's this whole history which I can talk about in terms of language, but sex worker gives empowerment and identity and agency. This is something that I choose. This is something that I want, that I choose in this instance, or that I choose as a livelihood, whatever it is. So Hillary Clinton comes out and uses that sex worker term, which is fascinating. So, sorry to be telling all these long stories, but the point I guess I'm trying to make is when the sex workers are at the forefront and we're able to learn from them and they're able to direct things, it's not me helping them. It's them informing me. It's them and us educating each other. And I think that is where real growth can happen, and it's what makes me really, really excited to continue working in this area.
Dean Hixon.
Well, listening to Daniel and hearing what people are working on, you can see why this is what's actually motivated me. One of the things that actually keeps me engaged in being a librarian and information science professional, because I get to specialize in being a generalist. I get to hear these stories every day. And this is why I'm an academic librarian, because I get to find out all these amazing things that the faculty are working on and researching, and I get to help support them and the students who are working with them. So that's really what makes me passionate about coming to work every day, is being able to interact with all these great people, because these are the real geniuses. You know, and if I can be a support person to help them achieve what they're trying to achieve, that's really what motivates me. The kinds of changes that have been happening in my field, many of you know about these, because there are a lot of people who are predicting the demise of libraries, that libraries are going to go away. Why do we need a library if everything's available on the internet? So certainly one of the major changes that's happening in my field is that we're far less reliance on print and physical resources, books and journals, much more reliance on digital, electronic resources. Another major change is an expectation that people will have access to whatever information they need, whenever they want it, in whatever form they want it, and that they'll have it free of charge, by the way. So one of the things that we're finding that we have to do in our field is we're having to help people navigate this increasingly complex world. Technology is ubiquitous, technology is disruptive, and people are having to try to make sense of this wealth of information. So we try to help people find what they want in whatever form they might need it. We try to help them decipher it. We try to help them find a way to evaluate what they're finding so they can determine if it's real, if it's valuable, if it's trustworthy. We try to help them then know what they may do with what they find. So we try to help them navigate this increasingly worldwide context of copyright and what they're permitted to do with what they find on the open internet. Just because it's on the open internet doesn't mean that they have the right to reuse it and repurpose it and create something of their own from it. So we try to help them with that. We try to help them customize it, because people more and more have this expectation that they're going to be able to customize whatever they find and make it their own and add something of their own to it. So I'd say that there's some of the things that are driving us, and every day is a new challenge. Every day is something completely unexpected. And one of the things that you find with technology is that you cannot predict what use people are going to make of it. People are going to find their own uses of it, and you can try to plan and you can try to prepare ahead of time, but every single day is a brand new challenge, and you just have to go with it. You have to wing it all the time.
Thank you very much. As a faculty member, I am increasingly frustrated when you ask students to engage in research, and their first line of defense is, let's Wikipedia the thing and Google search it. And the idea of actually going to the scientific literature and looking at original sources is a challenge, to say the least. And so I know that we often will have our students go to the library, and thank you so much, and you and the librarians have a hard time with the students who recognize, and they've grown up with that. If you need something quickly, you just find it right on the internet without knowing the source of the material and just assuming if you can read it, it's the truth. And it's a scary thing,
Actually, the first place I start my own research is on the internet and in Wikipedia.
Interesting, yeah.
That's where I start.
Okay.
That's where I start.
So, Dr. McCrakin, you go first on the last question for the evening. When we had our beta test of the Genius Next Door, an audience member came up and applauded the program, but said, boy, it would have been really nice if you had asked one additional question. And that is, we've all assembled here in the audience tonight to hear the geniuses talk. And we want to leave with understanding what is the most innovative thing on the horizon in your field. Not only that, why should we care as an audience? So what's happening in your field, looking forward? What's innovative, and why should we care?
Well, I would answer this question sort of in two ways. It's somewhat in relationship, actually, to what you're talking about, Carol, in terms of multimodal composition. And what I would say in terms of the big picture is, where does the individual physical material body start, and where does it end in relationship to digital technologies, right? So if we took away all of your digital communication abilities right now, how would you communicate? What would you do? Not to say that you couldn't, by all means, of course you could, but it would change. And where does your body start, and where do the technologies end and begin, right? And where do they come together? In terms of sex work in particular, when I think about this concept of bodies and the digital, I also have to think about surveillance, and I have to think about rights, and I have to think about safety. And one of the things that's coming up, I'm sure everyone in the audience is very familiar with trafficking, sex trafficking in particular, which is often very closely related and even conflated with prostitution. Sex work, I neglected to state, is a very broad range. It doesn't just include prostitution. So it's lots of different things that are both legal and illegal. But prostitution and sex trafficking are huge in people's minds. And it's a lot, there's a lot of concern about criminalization and how we best go about doing this. And I would say on the horizon, and this is directly related in some ways to the United Nations Universal Periodic Review that I was talking about, people are looking at, is criminalization necessarily the best way to go about dealing with these problems? Certainly in terms of trafficking, it needs to be criminalized, but in terms of prostitution, does it push people further into the shadows? Does it make it harder for them to find safety? Does it make it harder for them to work together? So on the forefront, a lot of people are looking at these issues of criminalization, decriminalization, anti-criminalization, looking worldwide in terms of what's happening in other cultures, in other countries, and ultimately looking at what's most important in terms of an individual's safety, and how can we empower that individual to make their most informed, best decisions. And so I would say, whether it's my writing classroom, where I'm encouraging my students to go out into the community, which I do, and they do civic engagement, and they are connecting with the community and getting the answers with and through the community, and the same with what I would describe people who are involved in the sex industry, who are also at the forefront helping to create those answers and say what makes the most sense for us in terms of empowerment, agency, and safety. And those are some of the big things that I see coming that we need to ask in terms of questions and what's going to make people most safe and able to speak their truths.
Thank you so much. Dean Hixon, will you take that same question? Let's look into the future. What's innovative? What's new? And why should we care?
Well, since I started in this field, everything that we do on a day-to-day basis has changed. And it's so hard to identify for me a particular, a innovative and an innovative practice. Certainly one of the things that's driving us is looking at the library as a space for collaboration. So exactly the opposite of the popular stereotype of what it means to be a librarian, where you go around and you prohibit people from speaking. What we work very hard to do is to build those opportunities for collaboration in our space. So that's a radical shift. It's not your grandmother's library anymore. And so that's what drives us, and you'll see that if you come over to our library, you'll see that we've been dismantling some of those old spaces and opening up space. And the reason for that is we want to create mobile spaces, spaces where people can create the kind of collaboration spaces that they need on the fly and connect with resources, connect with other people, and so building those connections. So I think that, and then of course increasing, and Daniel touched on this too when he was talking about interaction. As we build and create more digital resources and building collections of unique and rare resources so that more and more people can have access to them, there's an expectation and a desire to make it possible for people to interact with those resources, to add to them, to change them, to modify them. So that opportunities for collaboration and for interacting with the world of information and resources and data.
Thank you. I would like to extend that same invitation. Take an opportunity, walk across the street, and take a look at Dean Hixon's library. And if you were there 5 years ago, you will not recognize it today. What she's done in terms of these spaces that she's talking about is critically important to the way students are beginning to, our new incoming students coming in with their digital apparatus and collaborating on class projects. And the first floor, which used to be a place which was a silent space, and you could hear a pin drop, now you hear students or a buzz, and they're talking, they're drinking coffee, and they're working and sitting in these stations. It's a very different, lively space today. But there are quiet spaces upstairs, if I'm not mistaken. So you can still find a quiet space to read a book upstairs. So with that, Mr. Scott, you get the last word.
Uh-oh. Can I use a few?
You certainly
All right.
Yes. Innovative.
So I'm in the unenviable position of being the guy who has parents of students looking at him saying, so you want my child to go to business school so they don't have a job when they graduate? I'll give you an assortment of answers as to why it's important and why you should care, and then you can choose the one that matches your particular personality. How about that? First off, the American dream, it's not dead. I don't like that. I think it's changed, right? So the finding a corporation that you can work for and assuming that job's going to be there by the time you retire unless you're doing military work is just not realistic. So you'll be starting something, and chances are at some point in your career you'll be working for an entrepreneur. So knowing how to work in that environment, I think, is vitally important. It's a skill set that you need. That's number one. Number two, I do this with students a lot, particularly high school students, because cash seems to resonate with them. But I ask them to raise their hands. How many of you are looking to go to College of Business? A lot of them do, because that's why I'm there. And then I go, well, how many, just by show of hands, how many accountants do you know that are multi-billionaires? And they go, how many middle managers then? No. Okay. Marketers? What? No. How about entrepreneurs? Oh yeah, no, yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, I want to do that, and so I can appeal to the wealth creation aspect. I think it will please you personally, and I think Nathan in the back will back me up, and Frank who's been gracious enough with his time to be on our team in entrepreneurship would back us up about the students here in St. Petersburg. The one that resonates the most with our students is when you say, how many of you want to change the world? Not just be a passive participant, but be the person that makes this place better by the time you leave it. That's the thing that really hooks them. That's the one that makes them say, yeah, entrepreneurship's the one. Then they go take Nathan's great creative problem-solving class, and they learn some of those skills on how they can change the way that they process information and create better solutions, which then they can then leverage to change the world. And you see their eyes pop, and they go, wow, this is the thing, right? Because if I can leverage wealth creation, and I can leverage the idea that people aren't going to be stuck in one place for the rest of their lives, and I can leverage all of those things to make the world better before I leave this earth, that's the really cool thing. So if we can give them the skill set to do that, I think we're in a fortunate position. So that would be why I think you should care, is because these kids care, and they care for the right reasons, and they want to make an impact. So hopefully all of you here will take the opportunity to join us on campus at some point and interact with the students because they want to do the right things.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all, three geniuses. At this time, I would like to open up the floor to just a few questions. And I'm going to just cut those off quickly because, really, this is only part one of a two-part program tonight where we're going to go next door and have a more intimate conversation with our geniuses. So you raise your hand first in the back. Let me come back.
My name is Don Modesto. I teach at HCC. My question is, going back to Wikipedia, which is a famous bugaboo of professors. They restrict their students from using it typically. I'm curious as to why, what, and how about your using Wikipedia. Why is that your first resource? What do you find there you don't find elsewhere? And how do you filter sound material from the nonsense? Thank you.
Well, one of the things that I look at with Wikipedia, as I said, it's a place to start. It's a single place where you can get a general idea of the work that's being done. The Wikipedia editorial board actually works very hard at maintaining good sources of information. So when you create an entry in Wikipedia, there are expectations for citations and verifying the information that you're providing. And they go through, they have a board that goes through and they will remove information, they edit information. It's sort of the collective consciousness. Anyone in the world can sign in and edit content. It's verified, but it's verified by a group of people who are interested and who maybe are self-appointed experts in a topic, but they are required to provide citations. We had a professor last semester at the university who gave an assignment in one of his history classes, and I think it was an outstanding idea. And this was, here are topics. I want you to go out and create an entry for Wikipedia. And that required those people to dig in to the resources, to dig into primary source materials, and to actually write a well-documented research paper that then got submitted to Wikipedia. There have been studies that have been done in the literature in my field that have looked at the accuracy of information in Wikipedia as opposed to, say, a traditional encyclopedia like Encyclopedia Britannica. And what the studies have shown is that the accuracy of the information in Wikipedia is at least comparable to what is in the more standard traditional encyclopedias, And when there are errors, they can be corrected instantly. They can be corrected immediately in Wikipedia. That's not the case with a traditional resource like Encyclopedia Britannica. So is it perfect? No. But it represents, there are hundreds of millions of hours of human effort put into that resource. And it's the collective consciousness of the people who have an expertise, who have an interest in a particular topic. There are going to be errors, but when they're discovered, they're corrected more quickly. Is it perfect? Is it always impartial? No, absolutely not. It's a human endeavor, so it's going to have its problems. But I start there, because what I find there are sources and citations and a place for me to get a basic understanding of a topic about which I know nothing. It's a starting point for me.
Thank you.
So I do the same. I'm a writer now, and I start out with an overall with Wikipedia, but then I go back and look at specific references. But I can use Google to get that. That was not always available. So I think when you're talking about Wikipedia, you ought to look at the reverse side of being able to use Google to get to those sources and check it yourself.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Norm Smith, Eckerd College. Question for Dan. You talked a bit about teaching entrepreneurship, and maybe it's a matter of semantics, but your examples were what I would call the development once the idea is hatched, if you will, from incubator. Can you teach the incubation of ideas, perhaps using discontinuous entrepreneurship or discontinuous innovation? How would you go about to start that?
I think probably the only genius move I've made in academia is convincing the university to hire Nathan in the back. Yeah, we took a gamble on that. We when Dr. Jackson started this program, he went out and asked local entrepreneurs, what are the skill sets that are essential for these people? Not just to be great entrepreneurs. I mean, that's difficult, but just to be great people or great employees, somebody that you would hire. And they developed this 4C model. It's community, creation, creativity, and did I say communication already? Did I say that? Okay. There's 4 C's. There's great, but creative. Problem solving was a critical element of that, and I had had the chance to meet Nathan at USF Tampa. We were colleagues over on that side of the bay for a while, and it must have been a cup of coffee or something, and I think Bill had asked Nathan, "Can you teach creative problem solving?" And his head started slowly wagging, and then it started wagging a little bit faster, and like, yes, of course. That's what I got my master's degree out of. Yes, this is a process that can be taught. And so we kind of took a flyer and said, would you be a creative in residence, which doesn't happen at colleges of business. So it was really cool for him to say, okay, yeah, that sounds like something of interest to me. And he started working with the students, and I think he kind of got to dip his toe in the pool, and our students got to dip their toe in the pool, and then we asked him to teach a class, and now that thing's taken on a life of its own. Very soon in the very near future, I foresee a time when the very first class that they take, as it is now, will just consume Nathan's entire teaching schedule of walking through the process of being able to generate as many ideas as humanly possible, and then have the sufficient enough toolkit to be able to reconverge on the ideas that have some viability behind them. And so yes, we very strongly believe that's something that can be taught. And I personally do I see Ruben back there? We've got these great students to be able to use that process and come up with just some fantastic stuff. So I think it was a hypothesis. I think we see it working, and I think guys like Ruben are out there proving that it's having an effect on the students and making a positive impact on our community. So I would love to speak with you more about that and what you're doing too. We're always wanting to learn more, so it's great to meet you. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Is there a question for Dr. McCrakin by chance?
First, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for opening up what I think is an incredibly exciting dialogue in a range of disciplines. I teach English language and literature online, almost exclusively, sometimes in actual space and time in classrooms at the college and university level. And I'm wondering, and I'd also like to mention that I use Wikipedia and let my students use Wikipedia, although I qualify it with it's not generally that well accepted as reliable, but I'm glad to hear that it's as good as Encyclopedia Britannica. My question has to do with wondering if you have, how familiar are you, and what do you think about what I understand is a relatively recent innovation in online education called MOOCs, M-O-O-C, which is, as I understand, a kind of free of charge way that some very well-known universities like Wellesley, MIT, and Harvard are giving classes online. What do you think of that? How is that changing education, etc.?
I know a little bit about it. I think the acronym is just fascinating. I'm like, MOOC, who did this? But aside from the name, I think it's interesting. I don't think it's clear yet what it means or what it's going to look like, right? But in terms of, to provide a little bit of context, it's this idea about teaching composition, so to speak, writing in an open university, open access, free. And I don't know if I overheard Dr. Hines speaking about this earlier tonight. Maybe not. Maybe I misheard you. But I'm not sure. I think it depends on what it looks like. It's fascinating because you were talking about making our information free and accessible, right? And I'm all about making things free and accessible. I think it definitely shifts things in terms of, especially in the academy, and who owns knowledge and who has the right to teach knowledge and how do we do that. But for me, as an individual and a professor who is not afraid, I am not afraid at all of getting replaced by a MOOC. Not at all. I'm just not. And so I think it can be a really good thing. I know they're throwing a lot of money at it, but it also sounds like there's a lot of really good minds that are involved in the project. So I'm interested to learn more. But on the whole, it's like Wikipedia. One of the things I was thinking as you were talking is it's about opening up resources. I know sex worker rights advocates who go into Wikipedia and correct things and add sources that people would never know, right? And they're not false and they're not making them up. They're really, they're checked out and they're consistent and they stay. And so for me, the MOOC is that kind of a thing potentially. I need to learn more about it. But that if you open up education and you open up access, that's an amazing thing. That's a really positive thing. And why should these, I'm against the whole white tower thing anyway, right? I'm like, let's get messy and get in there and just figure it out, So.
As you can see, USF St. Petersburg, your university right next door, has an outstanding array of faculty. I would like to point out that our university is your university. Our library is your library. I'd like for you, if you have not had a chance to walk our campus, take a look at it. Talk with some of the students. Start spreading the word. You are in the midst of a transformation of one of the finest universities in America right here. We are small, we are excellent. And so I encourage you to come over there. Some of you in this room have also taken classes as a non-degree seeking student. Some of you might have taken classes as a senior auditor. We encourage that as well. So it's kind of our own version of a MOOC, if you're a senior citizen in here. You can senior MOOC it. So, I just wanted to put in a quick plug for the university. This is only part one of a two-part program tonight. Again, by the way, by show of hands, how many of you like this idea of bringing alcohol into the theater? All right. Sorry, Hank. So again, can we have a round of applause for our geniuses? The idea is to do this regularly. What does that mean? We're not sure yet, but it will happen on a Thursday evening, possibly monthly, once a month. We're going to try to set that schedule in motion. So hopefully you've enjoyed what you've heard tonight and want to learn more and engage more. Again, our geniuses are going to go right next door. There are 3 tables and lots of chairs. So please go grab a drink, go next door, and have a one-on-one dialogue with the geniuses. Thank you all for coming.